Education?
3 different places. I went to Pennsylvania on a bike trip, and then went down to Fort Knox to visit my daughter. She was graduating from an ROTC program. And then we have a timeshare last week in Vermont.
Oh.
We did that a regular week.
Oh, that's great.
So it's been 2 weeks. It's been great. And now the cascade of stuff at the office.
Is it 9? Yeah. Well, Becky, hit that for me. We're ready. We're ready. The light is on. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So it's 6 o'clock, and we'll call this meeting to order. This is the business meeting for the month of August of the Board of Education. We will be having actually some business. I need, in terms of full disclosure, we'll be conducting some business at the August 25th meeting. Primarily, I'm sure Jill will be doing some appointments at that point, right? Some further appointments. So I call the meeting to order. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Could we, just announcements for anyone who notices up here, we are 4 board members tonight. 2 board members are on long scheduled vacations. And it was for that reason that we changed our original agenda around, and we're going to do our board retreat. We're going to combine it into one meeting starting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on August 25th before our next board meeting. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Mary, second. Jim. All those in favor? There we go. So I'll move to Board of Education comments and reports. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a couple things. Tonight, I actually wanted to comment on the recent guidance to school districts for creating a safe and supportive school environment for transgender and gender nonconforming students that was issued in July. The stated purpose of the guidelines, as I understand it, is to assist school districts in fostering a discrimination-free school environment for all students. And it's also geared towards helping to educate the community, including parents, residents, etc. And school districts and boards are encouraged to distribute the guidance to those groups to help educate them. For the reasons that follow, I would suggest that this guidance document that State Ed has issued is very incomplete in terms of the information it provides to achieve those goals. For example, it's supposed to be geared towards ensuring a safe and supportive environment for all students. And yet you'll recall last fall there were a number of objections to our proposed bathroom policy based on the safety of those other students. That is, those gender conforming students, perhaps uninitiated to gender non-conforming students using their same bathroom. So I don't see those safety concerns addressed in this document. And so for us to use it as an education tool, it seems to me that it doesn't give us the guidance in how to address that situation, which, as 30 some odd people said, could be a traumatic encounter between students and, presumably for their parents when they find out about it. So I think that needs to be addressed before this document is used to educate anyone. Secondly, I think it's also incomplete in that the regulations and statutes that are cited in the guidance make it sound as if those laws and regulations are only there to protect transgender students or gender nonconforming students, when in fact each of those same anti-discrimination provisions are designed to protect religious practices as well, but that's only mentioned in passing. And so, in my view, if we're to protect all of our students, then it seems to me that we must also be supportive of a child's or parent's potential religious objection to sharing bathrooms with those with different anatomies. What do I mean by that? And I don't mean to get graphic, but what I mean is, there's several faiths that are represented in our school community and the greater community that believe that God is the intelligent designer of human beings and has created each individual from the very beginning of time, and certainly from conception and birth, as either male or female. And that using this guidance document in its present state essentially tells that believing student or parent that they cannot express their belief that it is God and not the student or the parent who has decided what gender someone is, because for them to express that religious belief and potentially object to the gender nonconforming student's presence in the bathroom would be deemed bigoted or discriminatory, according to this document. Sure, we can allow for that or force that gender-conforming student to use another bathroom, but isn't that the very type of discrimination that our bathroom policy adopted last fall was designed to avoid for the benefit of all our students? And so for me, the bottom line is I believe that this guidance issued by State Ed is wholly inadequate and incomplete in facilitating a safe and supportive environment for all of our students. And I would request and recommend before it's used to quote unquote educate anyone, students, staff, or the community, that it needs to be fair and balanced and completed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I just take the prerogative to say, and I haven't talked to anyone on this, so I'm just going to give you a board president's perspective. We are in a wait-and-see approach here. We have been through this, struggled with it, we'll continue to wrestle with it, and I'm glad that our policy, in the end, as we worked our way through it, but I think the last 2 lines in it say that we will come back and review on a periodic basis. The board called for that, so it's not something that ends up on the shelf and we forget it. And so these guidance, I mean, as you know, this is driven in part by the governor, sending a smart comment to the new education commissioner, and demand, use the word demand, move this forward. And when I read that, I thought of ours and thought, okay, we've been through this and we're going to continue to go through it. But I don't see us, unless you see something different, I don't see us jumping through hoops on this. I don't see us, we've been through this, and I think our attitude will be wait and see. I haven't spoken with you.
Yeah, and the guidance document from the state is not intended to do nothing more than be informational to school districts. So the state's not going, at least at this juncture, the state's not going to go around and require every school to have a particular policy. It's guidance document to say as schools and community look towards establishing such policy and regulations, here is a document to start looking at. So that's why they call it a guidance document, very specifically that, versus a state regulation. Where it was a regulation, then we had some mandated requirements behind it.
Right. My intention, and perhaps I was misunderstood, is not to criticize our policy.
No, I understand.
That's,
No, I understand.
But we won't use the reason I'm saying we won't use the guidance document any more than, quite frankly, to what we have just done now, share to people as FYI saying that this information came out from the state. Yeah.
But the document itself towards the end says this should be used. It doesn't say shall, but should be used to educate the community. And what I'm saying is, if we're going to educate the community about the entire issue, we need to include a lot more information than what's in that guidance document.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Todd?
The only thing I wanted to bring to the attention of the board is, and I've probably had about a dozen or so questions on this, is We're part of the Suburban Athletic Council. So as a result of that, and this year is the first year where it's happened in our soon-to-be softball, but right now in soccer, we have got rid of the freshman team. So in the past, we've had a modified freshman, JV, and varsity. The athletic council voted, and we were on the minority of the voting for this because it was becoming quote-unquote unfair to other schools playing that don't have enough students to field a freshman team. They were playing schools like us that have quite a few students, and we were up against potentially 7th and 8th graders on their freshman team, as an example. So the athletic council decided that it would behoove all of the schools if there were no longer freshman teams, specifically right now for softball and for soccer. So I've been approached by dozens of people saying, well, why did the school board vote to get rid of the athletic program? And it's been a great, I'm glad the post was done, looks like it was July 13th, and it wasn't our decision, and that's the big thing that I want to make sure everybody understands is it wasn't our decision to get rid of the freshman team. We abide by the rules of the Suburban Athletic Council because we're part of it, and it is what it is. Does that unfortunately mean there are less kids playing in that level? Absolutely, but I mean, our hands are tied on that. So again, the point that I'm making here is this was not a decision by Shen. This was a decision that we were forced to abide in, and unfortunately for big schools where we have a lot of students, it affects us. So it makes it better for the schools with less kids, but negatively affects us. So disappointing, but there's nothing we can do about it at this point.
I just know on the I think I'm right on this, on the appointments tonight, we have at least one, I just because I know it was right, the first name on the list was an appointment of a 9th grade modified boys soccer coach.
Yeah, see, because we still have those same titles, contractual or otherwise. So you'll see the similar appointments. The structure of games and teams will be different, but there'll be some internal structures, internal demarcations, names, terms that we'll still use until otherwise.
Exactly.
So that may create some of that,
Right.
I want to say confusion. But not to, this typical board comment, but just one thing though, there's if you want to say, somewhat of upside to that, because quite frankly with you, the competition level was getting pretty awful to the point where it doesn't matter if you have a lot of kids playing. If they weren't playing against anybody, that's become a pointless exercise as well. So I think on the other side of it, they're hoping, so it won't necessarily impact our numbers as much. So that's a big concern people have.
Right.
We'll still have the similar number of kids playing, and unfortunately, sometimes a similar number of kids not playing. The long-term effect, or should I say probably more mid-term effect, is that we have better competition. And hopefully safer competition as well. So I think that's what initial, when people hear elimination of something, they think that less numbers. But essentially, we have very similar piece of it. And it changes the selection classification rules. In fact, it's one of the things that we'll be bringing to the board probably a month out, because we have to modify that based upon the new New York State Public High School Association regs, but we'll do that in the fall once we get into policy review committee.
It's just humorous to hear that because of budget cuts, we had to do that, and you don't have the facts.
Yeah. It's amazing what
Exactly.
stories get created out there, right? Yeah. So we'll need Stan Huddy to be right on top of this. Right? Stan Huddy, this is
Glenn's
Stan
got
Huddy.
it.
Yeah,
He's
like,
got it.
Stan Huddy will be right on top of this, right? Yeah, this is.
Well,
yeah.
Kelly did a
Yeah.
pretty good post
Yes.
on our website on that,
Yes.
so there's a lot of information out there already. Unfortunately, people don't read, and they run to the speculation first.
That's it.
Mary?
Couple things. I wanted to wish our students who are taking Regents exams next week the best of luck in their exams. I'd be curious to know statewide how successful that administration is when it's over, because I know this is the first year in a little
The
while
Algebra 2 one,
that we've had summer administration. So I'd be curious to know how successful that is for our students and across the state, whenever we can get that information. And I'm looking forward to summer school graduation. I know that's going to be
Yes.
exciting. And I wanted also to call out, when we were looking and reflecting on goals documents, we had the profile summaries attached to that. And one of the things that we expect of our students at whatever level that's age appropriate, that they be involved citizens. And I just couldn't help but notice with great pride that students in the summertime were helping Capcom with back-to-school backpacks. And they were our students, July 31st, packing backpacks for
great.
students in need. So proud of them.
Good, good, thank you. And I just would comment on our agenda. I'm always look forward to the meeting in August when we do the tax rate, the tax levy issue. There are several factors that are, adult report cards, right, in terms of how we're doing, these various surveys that come out, and we've had a very good spring. But, for some folks, our report card is how we're doing on the tax side. So I think we're doing very well, and I think we'll see that tonight, so I look forward to that. And look forward to having our retreat in 2 weeks to talk about some governance issues, some communication issues, and to talk about goals, which are seeing if district and Oliver and the leadership team have done a lot on specific goals, and the board from a policy perspective likes to weigh in on those and likes to, I think it's healthy for us to have this discussion, which is open to the public, that part of the meeting as well. So I look forward to that in 3 weeks. That's all I have. And we have, we'll move to public comments. I don't know if there, I should ask the question before I read the long write up here. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the Board of Education tonight? Okay, now you can start forward and I'll read the announcement on the way in. There's an opportunity for residents to address the Board of Education. We'll ask your name and address to confirm your residency within the district and to use the event follow-up if necessary. The board will not address specific comments. The board reminds residents that the public comment portion of our meeting is only one item on a long agenda. We therefore ask that each speaker be as succinct as possible and limit remarks to 2 to 3 minutes. We also expect the residents to speak in a respectful and courteous manner so as to model civility and decorum for our students. We promise to do the same. Residents may also contact the board via email at boe@shennet.org. All questions come into the superintendent's office or shared with the board. Policy questions, concerns are typically answered by the board president. Operational questions and concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent. Yes, ma'am.
Hi there. My name is Virginia, and I live at one of the Country Knolls entrances at exit 10. My last name is Walsh, and I'm here to talk to you about my daughter, Victoria. I've been here before. I wanted to just be sure, my husband and I wanted to be sure that the board members received the same letter that we sent to the superintendent, and I believe we sent one to Michelle Mylod, possibly, but I'm not sure. A couple of people aren't here.
We can make sure that they get
Okay,
straightened
that's
out.
wonderful.
Yep.
Okay, great. Our request has been for many years for our daughter to go to a special needs school in Massachusetts. We have went ahead and made arrangements for her to attend this special school in Massachusetts. She has complex learning needs, and Shenendahowa has not been able to meet these needs. So we are continuing to ask the board to approve her to go to this school and pay for the school. So that's the bottom line. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions at all.
And there's a letter for everyone?
Everyone has a letter,
Okay,
yes.
okay,
I just,
okay.
yes.
Yeah.
And I know you already know
Oh.
about it as well. Yes.
Thank
And
you.
I did not give Mr. Robinson one because he already received one.
Already sent, you sent one, yeah, okay.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments? If not, we will move on to, thank you for bringing that to our attention. And we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Robinson?
None other than I could go into the presentations if you want to do it now.
Sure.
Sure, we have 3 presentations, and we moved up a couple presentations in light of the fact that the retreat would start so early, and we didn't want the board to have a 6 or 8 hour day, starting at 3 o'clock, and so therefore a couple presentations that we wanted at the end of August we brought. And this is the first one. This is, you've seen this presentation before by Mr. Amelia this time of the year. We're starting to fine-tune class sizes, recognizing that there'll always be fluctuations and, the plus and minuses, but in the end, they typically net out about where we are. The information you have on this is as good as the paper was printed on. because I'm sure that tomorrow we'll have someone drop out and someone would leave, and we get those all the way throughout the course of the year. As Mr. Miller prepared, just want to bring out a couple notes. I'm not sure if all board members saw an email. I was back and forth with some emails today. The overall enrollment for projected right now, as of this date, is actually slightly lower than our projections. And I brought the little green book to remind them back in November. It's pretty close. It's about 20 plus. When you think about it, that's pretty good, close statistical for a projection. And we know we're always fluctuating around that margin, but we are still less than last year. And if you remember when the Capital District Planning Commission, they were mentioning that we were kind of flatlining at the elementary level. And flatlining mean, plus or minus 100 is kind of flatlining. That sequencing, we're about 68 less than this time last year when you do that year-to-year comparison. So to come to give the board some context, the big piece that we try to look at when we look at elementary enrollments, and Mr. Miller will walk you through some more details, is try to create balance within schools in terms of overall numbers, balance across grade levels and sections, and so we move sections from one grade level to another grade level to make adjustments. When we have grade levels that Mr. Miller would talk about it because we don't knock on wood. And to give you some perspective, when I started here, and I remember the first time, I started in July, and my first real meeting was an August meeting, and the board was looking to add staff in August, which was shocking to me, because of enrollments. And at that point, we didn't have the process we have now. And we knew we need to have something that we could get a better handle on where enrollments are, where projections are, and so that's why we started this very analytical process here. And at that point, we were at like 30 sections that were, and I remember Mrs. Gray was here, and she was advocating the target, and we were like 30 plus section easily, way over the target. And you're here tonight, I would have Mr. Miller share that good news. So show the progression. The process has fine-tuned quite a bit over the years, and we try to keep a good handle on this, and Mr. Miller in the registrar's office try to keep a good handle on it as well. So as the presentation goes through, if there are questions you have, we'd be more than happy to address them as well.
As Dr. Robinson mentioned, this is, the handout is run from this morning. Now, the registrar met with 6 or 7 families today, so those numbers are already off, but at least they're from this morning. And we have another month or so of what I would call more intensive registration that will take place before the start of school. These you're familiar with as a board. You have 3 columns down. The middle one is the average target. The right side is the maximum, and the left side is the stated minimum. So I know you've seen those before. What I'm going to show you here is an entire grade level for all the schools in the district. So we'll go grade level by grade level. So the first one up is kindergarten. The red line down the right-hand side, that's the maximum. In years past, you'll probably recall there were some sections here and there that went past the maximum at some of the grade levels. Happy to report that we really have none that exceed the maximum numbers. Tasago, you'll see on the bottom there's a 25 there, but if you also look right underneath it, the other section is 20, so I'm not sure why they've got 25 in one and 20 in another, because if you pull 2 kids out of there, then...
So that's what you will do, is move those eventually? That's
And part of that too is, in some cases they don't because composition of classes.
Right.
And I think I mentioned that to Mrs. Baber, that sometimes people get caught in the pure numbers, but the pure numbers is actually the least of our concern. It's the composition, the makeup of classes, the resources in the classes, resources not only material resources, but staffing resources, because if you have a class that highly, say, special education intensive, that's a whole different configuration of 20 or 25 kids than a class that's not. And so those are the things that sometimes it's kind of hard to explain to people when they're simply looking at the numbers. And that's the reason why, quite frankly, the only time we ever talk about the numbers is here with the board.
So that's K. Next slide would be first grade.
Okay, I'm not sure why this is not that.
Here we go. You'll see that there's 4 sections of first graders that are at the maximum number, which is 24. The bulk are below the maximum, below the average in many cases, and in a couple of cases actually below the
Same
minimum.
thing that you'll get again, the principals will look at that fluctuation piece of it.
Second grade, you'll see that everybody's below the maximum line by a few students in some cases, and in some cases as much as 5 or 6 Third grade, a deeper cuts as far as smaller class sizes here. Again, here's your number out here is your maximum, and you're well below that in all the cases.
And just want to point something out. One of the things that we do, we try to balance the sister school concept. In other words, if you see Orangen that may have like 17, and if you look down here at Shattuckon at 24. So if for whatever reason we get a ton of new kids at that grade level for Shattuckon, we actually may shift some of them to new enrollees primarily first to Orangen. So that's where we create a balance. And so in other words, what we can't afford as a system to have a lot of extra capacity just sitting around. So we try to balance the capacity within the sister school. And even last year, we had a situation, I think last year before last at Chango, I think grade 2, and we brought probably like a half dozen kids to Carrigon. One, because the Carrigon and Chango bus routes are very similar, so it's easy for the bus to pick those kids up and bring them to campus. And those families stayed here for a year, and quite frankly, they transitioned back the next year to there. So we try to transition them back to the home school, if it's possible. Some cases, family come, they don't want to go back to the home school. And so we know that's the situation. So again, that's the dynamics, the game within the game, if you will, when you're looking at the numbers.
And so when we look at that sheet here that's in front of you, that's where some of the determinations are made about. Do we have an extra section in one of the sister schools kind of as the lifeboat in case the numbers pop up there? And again, Chango and Octay are a little different because they're low.
And also, one last comment about Orangen, something that we're doing differently, FSD, Michelle? The FSD program at Orangen? The best program, I'm sorry, especially it's a high-intensive special ed program at Orangen. We're trying to mainstream those students more. So we're creating some seat space, if you will, in some of those grade levels. So as those kids transition for core area, there's space in the class, back to the whole composition. So if we had a class of 25 already and you transition 2 beds kids in, now you're 27. That would be a huge problematic. Or are we going to have a situation where we won't create a mainstream opportunities for those kids, but we know programmatically it's the better thing to do to create mainstream opportunities for them, particularly for the core subject areas. That's why some of the numbers at Orangen are artificially lower to create some of that capacity. And, you know, we're able to do it now, but it's one of those things that we have to monitor all the time because it's a program shift that impacts clearly spaces, if you want to say seat spaces, if you will, in different classes.
So 4th grade would be the next one up. And again, now your maximum line's out here too. Of course, that goes up, as you're aware, as you go through the grade levels, it goes up. So 4th and 5th grades at the maximum of 27. But you'll see that your highest numbers there are 25. There's 3 sections there. And again, the bulk are below that. 5th grade has a similar look to it. We do have one that touches here in Scano with 5th grade, but there's still a few seats in there. And then, of course, Tasago has a lot of 5th graders. It's about the only grade level that they have a lot of sections for, and they have plenty of room in case we need to transition some students over from Scano, which kind of leads us to this page, which is the more interesting one, I think, of all of it. We have 187 sections K through 5. Those are homerooms. So it comes out of Infinite Campus, so we pull all the teachers' homerooms that are there. There are 0 sections that are over the maximum. Last year at this time, there were 6 sections that were over the maximum, and 2 years ago, there were 10 sections that were over the maximum. So this has retreated each year. There are 6 sections that are at the max, which you just saw, at whatever grade level they were. But the interesting thing is, as you start going down this line here, here's your on target. That's the average, the middle one that the district has always shot for, and has been a little bit more difficult to achieve in recent years. But there's 31 sections that are literally on the middle of the target. And then the next grouping down is your minimum number. There's 34 sections at the minimum, and then these are under. But to give you a better perspective, this number up here, 97% of the sections are below the maximum. On the on target, 79% of the sections, which are all these here, are on the target or below. So they're on mid-range or below. And then finally, 36% of the sections are on the minimum level or below. And we haven't seen anything like this in several years.
And and I think Mr. Gilbert brought this up a few months back when we were talking about class sizes and budget. And I think it's an important point to make because people always say, well, what does my tax dollars, what does this mean for me? Well, to use a New York Thruway Authority, this is your tax dollars at work. Because in the prior years, Bob, can you point it? Prior years, all these sections below the minimum, we were cutting those sections because we had to in order to balance the budget. And so the difference is now is that, quite frankly, we have a lot more flexibility within schools where we're talking about below target, much less below minimum. And that's the big difference in terms of the fiscal capacity and our current state, if you will, that allows this to happen. And this is one of those things that we certainly can't take for granted because 2 years ago we didn't have this ability to do that. 2 years ago we weren't talking about anything we were below the min. We were looking to drop a section and bring it back up a target above just because we needed the staffing capacity elsewhere. So it's a good place where we are. And I think the context is important because sometimes people don't appreciate much less 2 years ago, much less 10 years ago. And I think we have a much better situation. Ideally, we clearly want to have more in this middle range than either end of those ranges, because either end of those ranges creates a situation that if we have move-ins, things become tight very fast. The bottom becomes like, whoa, is this the best use of resources, because class size numbers can be so low in certain situations. And yes, people may argue, well, the lower the better. I'm not necessarily convinced of that. I think it's a combination of factors that create a good learning experience for kids and not just simply a number of kids in the classroom, because we have seen it. I could point at schools with small number of kids and the quality of education has got awful. And I could point to schools with large numbers and the quality of education is wonderful. So it's all those other factors that goes into play. So we want to try to budget to ensure that we provide those experiences for those students.
Well, and to your point on how fluid this is, just looking at the numbers that are on here, and I'm looking at one particular section in Carrigon that we've dealt with, and that number's actually gone down from less than 2 months ago,
Yeah.
Where the concern was, so it does change that
And-
quickly.
Yeah, I was going to ask, it's almost a related question to either one of you. So we have, as you say, this is at 9 o'clock on August 4th, right? And by noon it may have changed, but how much change do we have during the year? I mean,
We have a lot of change all year long. I mean, between now and the first day of school, we're gonna register a whole lot more kids. We are also going to lose
Deregister,
students.
yeah.
Right. And then we'll see in the beginning of the year, our first attendance period, the month of September, that's usually has the first couple days of school, we have all these high enrollments, and then students don't come in and pick the schedules up because they're not here anymore and the parents didn't tell us that they were leaving. So then our numbers will drop after the first week of school, and they'll reconcile a little bit better September 30, and then again by October 31, we'll get a better picture of it. And then during the course of the year, some of the schools will crank up a few, and then they'll crank down. And so from beginning to end, we're usually end a little less than what we started at. And that's kind of what it is. And we were watching some sections at Chango over the last 5 weeks, and we lost 4 or 5 students out of this one area we were a little concerned with. So now we have now 5 seats available if somebody moves into that particular grade level that we didn't have a month ago.
So actually, Chango was an area that surprised me because not that it was a ghost town, but in a really short period of time, the population of Chango has filled in and changed a lot. I'd say within probably 3 years or less.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think surprised me was that we had as many kindergarten first graders, which we always seem to struggle with, who's coming, who's staying, all of that. And so I kind of had it in my mind that those would be smaller cohorts, and clearly they're not. So, but I'm really happy with the balance of the sections in each of the buildings. And I know that, when we're talking about which section is under, which section is over, not that we would get so granular, but I'm trusting that when there's a classroom that has a particular need, either because of population numbers or need, that there's attention to that so that families can be assured that they're getting the quality of service that they need in that classroom. And it might be different than the next door classroom, but it's what the students need.
Any other questions, Jim? Any
No,
questions?
sir.
Bob, we really appreciate this.
Do you want the extras for the missing board members or not?
It'll probably change again.
Yeah, don't
Oh,
worry
it
about
will
it.
change.
It will, yeah.
Okay, I'll have Vanessa mail you the new one.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. So, as Mrs. Carmen and Mr. Tortolak comes forward, this is also one of those presentations that we moved up, the SAVE presentation, because again, trying to balance the August 25th board meeting. And Becky and Jay will talk about some updates. A lot of this is going to be very similar, familiar, so we won't go into a lot of details about stuff that hasn't changed. So Becky, you want to highlight the changes and go from there?
Sure. So Shenandoah is committed to promoting a safe learning environments where students and teachers work collaboratively in pursuit of academic excellence and social and emotional growth. The information that Jay and I are going to be presenting to you tonight is really to provide a brief update on the progress that the district has made in regards to safety and provide guidance about the Safe Schools Against Violence and Education Act. So to be in compliance with the state regulations, we at Shenandoah have a district-wide SAVE committee, and the SAVE committee meets about 3 times a year. If needed, we will meet more. The committee consists of many different members, from Board of Education to administrators, to parents, to teachers, to union members, union leaders, students, people from the community we have on there. It's a wide variety of people, and each year that list of committee members comes to you for approval, and you have that tonight. What you will note is the students are missing because we don't know who the students are until the new school year starts, and it fluctuates. Sometimes they send different representatives when they can. Excuse me. Also, to note that every school in the district has a safety team, and those safety teams actually in the sister schools we've combined, and that was one of the things that Jay has been working on over the last couple of years, is trying to combine efforts, because in the sister schools they have to respond together anyway, so it made it easier to combine efforts. So the sister schools share their safety teams. There's members from both schools on those safety teams. Jay will talk a little bit about training and procedures.
Oh, yes, the trainings that we do involving the incident command systems as well. We'll do a training with the aides and monitors for the entries, locked door, we call them locked door guidelines. That's where all the doors in the schools are locked, except one is supervised or unlocked at that time, but it has to be supervised by the main door. We do the CPR AED trainings, of course, and also we do have the Sheriff's Department come in and do an active assailant type training with the schools and the safety teams. And that has been even with different groups within the schools, also food service. We've had that conducted with them as well. The after hours evacuation guidelines, Becky and I set that up for the community groups, and that's for something that they are aware of, to know what to do with even anything, a fire alarm activation to possibly an entry of a person at night, per se, upsetting the group or what have you. We found that there's a need for that. Also, the critical updates for the building level safety plans. Ian Feinstein and I from BOCES, Health and Safety, and Becky, we just conducted a training at SIFL with all the office staff from every building on their safety binders. What we did do is we focused on whether or not just complying with the law is just how to respond to the emergencies. We set up binders for every office. They're all consistent and the same. Weeded through their original binders. Some information was kept. Most of it was actually just abandoned, and we had updated safety plans, hazardous hazmat situations that they would follow. But again, it's a consistent plan. If you go from building to building, you're going to pick up that same binder. It may be different names or systems like that in that binder, but it's all one single plan. The other thing is that we have been conducting our mass evacuation drills. We conducted a rounds and Shattercons in the fall, and our last one was Octay in the spring. And that concluded our cycle. So every school has had the evacuation mass drills done, and all schools have incident command training as well at the same time as they do that. And it's interesting, because each school will have a different aspect on how they want to conduct their drills. And it's really just, we leave it up to them. I go in with the fire department and the police, and we set down some priorities to say, this is what we want to do. We want to evacuate the building. We want to take accountability. We need to relocate, accountability again, and then reunification. And so then they just add in their mixes. So Aranjan has some very interesting things that they come up with, ideas, and they built on those plans. The same thing with Octay. Has some great ideas. I know some of the board members were there too, watching that. So on to the next page here.
Apologize, there's a typo there, I just noticed.
Okay. All right, so this year here, we're also planning on creating critical safety plans for the transportation department. They have their plans for their buses and those types of things, but we're looking at more or less, they haven't had the incident command structure in their department, where we're going to start to look at ways to incorporate that along with the other departments. We have some outlying buildings that we need to look at and have develop their plans as well, similar to the schools have. Those two. And that's pretty much it for me.
And just real quick, one of the things too is food services staff also being trained, which is really important, and making sure that all the different players in the school district are trained in incident command system. The guide for safety and emergency planning is really intended to provide the district with the critical components of crisis planning process, and really to provide the framework for the district's crisis and emergency planning related practices. Over the past year, we have developed procedures regarding unification process. We really didn't have a formal, consistent process for reunification, meaning in the event of a drill, how do we get kids to their parents? And I think some of you guys at the drills have seen how we have set up different stations and organized them, and really provided security around that, and really worked with the building level staff on what do you have with you to make sure that this is the right student with the right parent, and so on and so forth. So that process is really something that's been outlined, and we're using a model basically that has been developed throughout these mass evacuations, and recommending it for all buildings to use that same process. In addition, we also we had a gap in our threat assessment process, which if you're on the committee, which a couple of you are, we had kept talking about threat assessment to self, or harm to self or to others. We have a system in place for if there's a threat to our system as a whole, but we really didn't have a consistent process in place in the event someone was posing a threat to themselves or to others. So we have worked over the last, actually probably a year and a half now, really putting together a consistent plan that's going to be K-12, that really outlines what needs to be done, when something needs to be done, when is the crisis team involved, what does a crisis team look like, and the threat assessment policy that was approved a couple months ago really laid that foundation for us. Jay?
Okay, so the security enhancement projects, and again, like Dr. Robinson said, a lot of this is reoccurring. The priority 1s and 2s have been completed, so the surveillance cameras and the pin pads in this identified locations have been installed. And currently we're working on the district-wide intrusion upgrade. What that means is that all the buildings will have a consistent security detection system within their structures that will report back to a central location. All the controllers are actually the brains behind the hardware, or the hard drives have all been installed in each school. And the next step is to be connected to each single devices within the building, wired back into that space, and then programmed up into the software of our computer bases. That's ongoing at this point. The last step is to upgrade all the pin pads. The pin pads will all be identical. Right now, we do have different ones. If you go from Chango to Scano-Tasago, you're going to see different activation points or alarm points. This way here, this will lump this all into one system, which we'll be able to connect back, and we'll be able to actually monitor what schools are doing at any point in time. We'll be able to tell when a building is armed or disarmed, and we'll be able to track any type of history as well. Okay.
Any questions?
I have a question. Do we have guidelines on, I've been reading too many novels. The latest David Balducci novel involves a school. Do we have guidelines in terms of after-school use, activities that go on in terms of, is there a number, if you expect 100 or more, you've got to have an administrator or a designated safety person there? And second, continuing question from that, about making sure the building's empty when it's supposed to be empty. You know, that someone's not staying in the school. Because I'm sure some of our issues deal with family matters, which when you talk to the deputy sheriffs or the police, they'll tell you those are the most difficult, and they can play out here in the school. So.
Right, whether it's the administrator of the building overseeing like a dance or something like that, or it's my security officers, if they're hired for the dance, it's their responsibility to stay. We call it last kid. So if they're expect for a certain time to end the dance, or per se it's 10:30, 10 o'clock, and sometimes we'll see later times and we'll question why that is. Well, they had to stay for a parent that was coming late to pick up the child, so the security officer will usually stay with them. So that's in their normal protocol of the procedures of campus patrols to do that.
And we do have a number that they can call if there's a situation or if we need security. We have use of facilities that guides a lot of the practices and procedures that take place after school. And like Jay had mentioned, we really worked with the YMCA to make sure that their procedures mirrored ours in our district, and we were meeting the needs of our students in the building while also meeting their needs. So we worked together to make sure our emergency protocols were matching.
I just think it's really important for the public to know, not the details of what the plans are, but that there are plans. They're very thoughtful plans. They account for social media to the best of the ability. They account for parents showing up without being expected. They account for everything you can possibly think of to keep students safe. And just to understand that as soon as information becomes available, if there's a situation, there's a plan to distribute it and communicate with families so that they know their children are safe until they can be released safely again back to their families. So I just really appreciate the work that the SAFE Committee does district-wide and each individual building, because I know you're talking about making one consistent plan, but I also know that the different characteristics of each building are accounted for, and we have two-story buildings, we have, this complex, and all of that is accounted for in each individual plan. Appreciate that.
Thank you, and I thank the board members for participating as well as our community members, because we have a lot of community members and emergency responders that participate and take time to come, and we couldn't do it without everybody else's help. So thank you.
Additional comments? I just mentioned, I had an experience. It was a great learning experience, and I know sometimes people roll their eyes about drills, but when I was with the state in the Corning Tower, we had a false alarm, and we made the decision to empty the tower because we didn't know it was a false alarm, and it was chaos, and it just made us bring everybody together and come up with all kinds of plans. And 4 weeks later, we had an incident. Our transformers caught on fire in the basement, and we had to empty the building again. It was unbelievable, the difference between, in 1 month, just between how unprepared we were and how prepared we were. And command center and everybody knowing their responsibility and dealing with, as I'm sure here, handicapped, disabled people, getting them out. It was amazing, the difference, and we looked like we knew what we were doing, but it was because of the false alarm. But thank you.
Thank you.
As Mrs. Wetmore comes forward, the tax report, this is the time of year where we present the tax rate, and also the board will be asked later on to act on the tax levy. And that tax levy will be used to determine tax bills. So there's a lot of terms that sound very similar, but they're related but different. So we want to make sure that as we go into the presentation, that if there are questions about the different terms, that we clarify those as well, because oftentimes people mix the terms and draw wrong conclusions.
So during the budget process, we determine what our resources are, and at that point, we establish what the tax levy is going to be. So that's a lump sum total of what we're going to levy as taxes. The next step in that process is to obtain information that the assessors have put together in each of the 6 towns, and we receive some fairly lengthy reports that give us our assessments for each of those towns. So this is taxable assessment for each of the 6 towns. You can see every year we experience some growth, some more than others. You clearly can see Clifton Park is the largest town. Half Moon comes in a close second, and the rest, while not unimportant, certainly aren't as large as the first 2 towns. Ballston Spa really, or the town of Ballston, has actually seen a very large growth. They have every year. In fact, they've actually outpaced Waterford. Waterford used to be our 4th largest. Now Ballston is. And in total, we saw a total growth in assessment, taxable assessed value of 1.41%.
Before Kathy, again, just to tie back to some budget conversations, when we were budgeting, we typically, we say we expect about a 1% growth. So, 1.4 is pretty close, modest to where we were. And again, those things are important because we're talking about 6 months ago conversation and looking at numbers that are real now. And so sometimes, people ask why the budget isn't more exact. Well, 6 months ago, we were making some, informed, but still a guess about what the actual numbers will be at this point. So just want to highlight this because we watched this very closely, this bottom line number, not necessarily so much the distribution between the towns, but the bottom line. Because at one point, it was very fast, it was high, double-digit increases, then it started doing this. And now we're flatlining in that 1.5% range, and we probably anticipate that's going to be the new norm, so to speak, in terms of increases. But any plus here is a good thing. So that's where we have negatives, where we have to worry about.
Right. So the increase in our tax base actually means everybody pays a little bit less because there's more to spread it around. So the next step in our process after we get our taxable assessed value is to look at the equalization rates, and that's set by the state. We obtain it from the county. Typically, these have been pretty stable, as you can see from the history, but this year we had 4 that changed. That's somewhat unusual for us to see that significant of a change in 3 of our towns. But that will drive some of what is going to look a little odd on the next slide, which is that 3 towns actually see a reduction in the tax rate, and the other 3 see an increase in the tax rate. So I guess you could say as the equalization rates increase, it creates more full value for that particular town, so they get a bigger share of the total. So, so those that did not change significantly actually saw a decrease in the tax rate, being Clifton Park, Malta, and Ballston. The ones that saw some variability in their equalization rates actually saw some increases. Again, our true value tax rate increase is actually a reduction of 1.21%. Last year at this time, we were at $17.75 per thousand based on full value, and this year we're at $17.54. So in grand total, when everybody's converted to full value, we're actually seeing reductions in tax rates, but because of the makeup of the various towns in the total, we're seeing increases in 3 of the towns.
Kathy, just this a point that I think a lot of times people miss. When you look at the equalization rate, the only one was, a couple of them that's close to 100, but the only one that's 100 is the town of Malta. The town of Malta, politically and otherwise, made a decision that each year they do reevaluation of property. And so it's closer to the true. And that's why the true value comes in at. It's making an assumption that if every municipality were to do reevaluation and assess houses at the true rates, for instance, you know, you can have someone living in a $400,000 house, but the value, the assessment might be $250,000 because it's not a true equalization rate that's being applied to it. Still come out to be a comparable dollar amount that people are paying in taxes. So that's where I think sometimes people see the confusion, thinking that if I live in Waterford, I'm paying more money than if I live. No, the equalization rate, as the name implies, equalize those differences. And I think that's an important part for people to realize. That's what this rate is doing. It's kind of always want to create this equilibrium. And so that's why we see the ups and downs. And so when we look at the true value as a school district, this gives us a good sense of, okay, from a tax perspective of being a levier of taxes, or we see that it's fairly flatline. In this case, it's negative, so it's a little bit below even the flatline market piece of it. So that's the piece that we kind of watch this piece of the overall, because to watch individual towns become difficult. For one, we only have a small portion of some of these towns. So, you know, not to say it's inconsequential, but in perspective of Half Moon, Clifton Park versus Stillwater, very small sliver of Stillwater that's in the district versus all of, almost probably, quite frankly, almost all of Clifton Park, a lot of Half Moon, of almost probably 85–90% of Half Moon in the Shen district. So those things are important, I think, but the bottom line here is that our tax true value has gone down. And yet we have did the things budget-wise to provide the capacity we spoke about before, even when we were talking about enrollment capacity. So the context, the reason why I'm trying to get to this, I think it's context is important. When people look at taxes, they just don't look at, what's my tax bill? Well, look at what you're paying for, what's the relative context of everything else. And yet we're seeing an overall reduction in the true value, which is pretty significant right now where we are as an economy and otherwise.
And there's no linkage between the tax cap and the tax rate, right?
No.
The true value tax rate. It's
Correct.
got the common word tax in it, but other than that,
That's
there's
it.
no.
Yes, very confusing.
Jim?
I just have a question, and I may have asked this during the budget process, I don't recall, but do we set aside a reserve for the tax certiorari
We do.
settlements?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're coming in droves as we speak, so
Really?
this
Oh, yeah.
is the time
This
of year
time of
that they
year.
Well,
file.
I know that,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but is it, are
Millions.
we getting more than usual?
No, I wouldn't say more than usual, but this is when we start to see a lot of the activity pick up on the tax certiorari claims.
Plus, you get some refiling, because there's a time
It's for a
limit.
year.
And then, you know, after a while, they have to refile because a lot of these things take years, some cases, to come to a head, between going to the court system and those kind of things.
Right, right. They're usually all dated July or early August, so that's when we see our big influx.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kathy. Good news.
So again, the board will be asked to adopt the tax levy, and we'll use that to determine tax bills that will go out. But I think overall, positive news for the taxpayers in the community. And, you know, as I said, I think the Half Moon last year was 0, this year is slight up. And the plus and minus is a negative overall in our tax, true value tax rate. Probably the best gauge to look at it. So.
And a good standard over the last several
Yeah.
years. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been fairly consistent,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
it shows up there. Sure.
And the last piece, I just put on here, only not necessarily to have a lot of discussion, but as the RFP for the land is out there now, so to speak, and people are inquiring about it, and it's a while, several months down the road, before we get probably formal feedback or formal proposals. However, one of the things that we had conversations a few years ago about the other side of the coin, the potential purchase of property, and at that point, a lot of the focus was on the town of Half Moon, because if you go back to Mrs. Wetmore's slide, the town of Half Moon is, even from an assessment piece of it, if I could find that, is growing quite a bit in comparison over the years. And so you see Half Moon, I mean, if we go back some years back, it was significantly lower than this. So we're watching where the growth is going, in other words. Particular residential growth. That's what's driving student population is residential growth. So one of the things I just wanted to engage the board a little bit of conversation that on the sales side, that's something that we probably look to do in probably towards the end of August, early fall, and into October, is potentially not necessarily the full-blown futures committee, but a smaller portion of that. The reason why I say not the full-blown, in the past, the futures committee had members from all the planning departments of all the towns.
Yeah.
We don't need that for this conversation. But at some point, and to the board's pleasure, maybe having some conversation with Mr. Casey to try to identify some key folks along with the board to come together to start having some preliminary conversations about, do we still want to keep the focus in the town of Half Moon, for example? Or do we have information to say do otherwise? Right now, all information is saying the town of Half Moon is still the direction that we need to go if we look for future purchase of property. How do we engage the political leadership in the town of Half Moon and under what conditions? How do we engage different property owners with large strips of land to start looking at, because we have some already identified, because we've been looking at this for a number of years. So how do we reconvene some of those conversations? So that's why I just wanted to kind of put the seed out there to the board now that it's something that we probably should start doing in the next several weeks or several months here. So once we get into the fall, once the RFP process start coming to a head in December, January, we can start tying the two pieces together and not having to lose 6 months when we could have actually been doing some work. So that's the essence of me putting this on the topic, asking the board to entertain this conversation.
So we have some stipulations that we would have to meet from state standards about what kind of a parcel of land would be suitable for building, and I'm sure that's something that you would share with us.
Yeah, that's one of those things too that we, and I know personally, I haven't looked at that in about 6 or 8 years. And so we would have to make sure that those assumptions, still stand. For instance, they were saying elementary school, 20 acres, middle school, 40 acres, high school, 80 acres, kind of, because part of it's the field space. When you build certain capacity, if you build high school, you're going to need more athletic spaces than an elementary school. And so that's where some of that comes from. So that's one of those things, you're right, that we'll look back, and it's more of a guidance piece from the state than anything else, because obviously they can't dictate thou shalt buy X, Y, but they're saying that, the ideal for this is those kind of things. So we'll review all those pieces as well to make sure that as we're looking at it, because a lot of it also comes from the configuration of the building. There's a smaller building, so some of those factors come into play as well in terms of the acreage that we potentially could target.
And just so we're clear with the public, it's a strategic potential purchase.
Yes.
It's not something we're going to build a building on tomorrow.
No.
It's just, it allows
No. And,
construction.
and it's so funny, Mr. Trainer, that all this conversation is kind of connecting tonight, because you just saw the enrollment numbers for elementary, and our elementary numbers have been relatively low in comparison to, say, our 9-12 numbers. Right now in probably actually 6-12. 6-12, we're probably 750 and above in every grade level. K-5, we're 700 and below in every grade level. So one of the things that we have to watch is how does that dynamic change? And so that's what we're going to watch to see how that changes. And plus the economics of the region dictate that as well. And I mean, that's the reason why the building growth, in November, we'll have the conversation with Capital Region Planning Commission, and we'll ask them specifically to probably focus a little bit heavier on where the property growth is going. There'll be more information for our Futures Committee to look back again, to really, to reaffirm, if you will, our assumptions that we made based upon information 3 or 4 years ago. So it would be a lot of those kind of things, reaffirmation of assumptions.
Considering the whole zip code conversation that's going on right now, I mean, you don't generally do that for a community that's not growing, so. with Half Moon, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting, and, while we're independent, it is really critical that and we've had great cooperation talking to the municipal folks as we've done things in the past. Interesting thing is that, Jim, I'm sure you remember from your time with the town at the council seat there, some of this is driven by decisions they make, as a for instance. So in the western part of Clifton Park, there are severe restrictions in terms of lot size and what can be done, and a water issue. Versus in Half Moon, where they don't have similar restrictions and have seen a great growth, especially on the residential side, and the big farms over there, and water available. So that's where the growth is coming. If you look at, I think your word is the perfect one, Jim, strategic, because even though we're selling property, we're looking to sell property if we get the right value for it, that was a strategic decision that was made in like 1973 to buy that piece of property, and we didn't fully use it, but we built 2 elementary schools on it, and this is the same kind of strategy, and we don't know what it'll look like down the road. All we know is people are buying up land in Half Moon, and if that's a target, that's something we need to be thinking about that and having discussions with that.
Yeah, just to your point, the town of Stillwater, and I know we have a very small part of it, just approved a rather large project for Stillwater, but water, public water and sewer will be throughout the area that the Shen, that's within the Shen district.
Yeah.
And in fact, another approved project is 319 units, all in the Shen district.
Thank you.
Surprise.
Do we need this anymore? Thank you.
But those are apartments,
Oh, those are perfect.
high-end apartments, so I don't know how many, kids will actually get out of it,
Yep.
but.
Well, I think it's good we're having this discussion,
Yeah.
and I'm sure the board, in terms of one of the goals, we want to stay ahead of the curve on something like this, so.
Does just, obviously haven't been through this before, does a purchase have to go to a vote? Is that on
Yes,
the
yes,
vote?
and that's where the
Okay.
timeline, timeframe, those things come into consideration.
And I think that's a reason to have discussions early, get this out, have some transparency, get this out early,
Yep,
and, but also be clear, I think, exactly, there's not someone knocking at our door saying, you gotta put an elementary school at this point. It's just, we need to be prepared. And if we don't do that, it's probably not good fiduciary responsibility on our part to ignore that, so.
Great.
So thank you for the update.
Thank you.
We'll move on to consent items. We have minutes from July 7. Could I have a motion to accept those? Mary, second. Jim, any questions or comments?
As I had to leave, I'm going to abstain, can I? Or does that mess up?
I need your vote.
You need your vote.
Okay. So I was here for part of it, is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Review,
yes.
Okay.
right?
I reviewed them, I just want to make sure that was
Yeah,
okay.
That's all that matters. If you
Yeah,
are-
absolutely.
Okay.
That's fine. All those in favor?
All right.
Motion carries. We'll move on to business items. Kathy just talked to us about the tax levy. We have a resolution on the tax levy, right? That has everybody seen? Could I get a motion to approve the tax levy? Todd, second. Jim? Any additional questions or discussions? All those in favor? Unanimous of those present. Thank you. Change order, let me see, both change orders were negative change orders, right? We're getting money back?
Yes, we are.
Can we have a motion to accept that? Todd, second. Jim? Any questions?
Question.
Yes.
We are getting money back, but we're doing other work and getting money back? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, there's an allowance, and you use that allowance for unforeseen things. So to the extent that there's money left after that, we reduce the contract.
Which is, okay, so we've completed the additional work and there's, okay.
So
I was
yeah.
going to ask you, how do we identify the work, but now,
Oh,
okay, never
yes.
mind. Thank you.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Could I have a motion for, let me see, the items 3 and 4, waste removal and contract extension with the bus services? Mary, second. Todd?
I just had a question.
Yes.
Seemed to be a significant reduction in, what we're going to have to pay for waste removal. Did we change the specifications at all? Is it exactly what we had before?
From a few years ago, I think we tried to quote back several years ago, I want to say 10, 11, I don't remember now off the top of my head what year, but was the first year that we did an RFP or a bid for these services, and we saved substantially, a huge amount of money at that point in time. And since then, we've continued to bid, but it's remained around that same cost area, so.
So we didn't reduce the scope, it's just.
Correct,
better price.
correct. It's just maintained that same sort of level, modest increases maybe, but same level of cost.
Good.
Well worth doing that bid.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Item 5, contract SUNY Research Foundation for school psychology trainee program. We started that last year, right? Mary, I think you asked a question, right, about how to go?
How to go, right? And I was happy with the answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Can we have a motion on that to move this? Mary, second. Jim? Any additional questions? All those in favor? Carries. Contracted services for special education with a number of providers. Can we have a motion to move that? Todd, second. Jim? Any questions, comments? All those in favor? Approval of the district SAVE plan, which was discussed earlier. Can we have a Mary, motion? Second. Jim? Questions or comments? All those in favor? Contract with Saratoga Center for the Family. Can I have a motion on that? And then I think we have a question. Mary, second. Jim? This one, I was a little confused on this one, because this one, when we talked about the Center for the Family, we talked about an amount each, an estimated amount of services of $15,000, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And then this deals with $15,000, but this deals with $15,000. Is it a different $15,000? This,
No, it's the same.
okay.
Mhm.
Who pays for the services? Is that
It's
insurance?
billable. It's billable, Medicaid billable services and/or insurance of the participants.
100%.
That's how, so it's kind of, it's short of, not use the word walk-in clinic. We're not having a walk-in clinic on site. However, it's the same process that a parent and will have if they go to any other private provider in terms of insurance or Medicaid or whatever coverage they have. And so the Saratoga Center for the Family will work directly with the parents and to deal with that aspect of it. The partnership piece with the school comes in a sense that our staff, be it teachers, counselors, otherwise, may notice something going on with the kid and say, something's going on here. Let us reach out to the parents, because right now we have situations where, quite frankly with you, we've reached out to parents and they say, yeah, we're going to get outside help. They never get outside help. This way, we could reach out to parents and say, not only that you get outside help, but the help could come where your kid is, and then they'll make the Saratoga Center will make the necessary connection with those parents. And so it creates, it's more than a convenience, because I don't want to belittle it by saying it's convenience for family. It's truly creating that linkage that's sometimes otherwise broken, and because families sometimes don't know how to access services in some instances, don't know how to access finances to cover for services in other instances. So it creates those situations, and if you want to say reconnect that link. And as a school, we become their conduit. But as a school, we cannot just refer a kid to this. We make reference, they make the connection with the family. It's always in the center for, no pun intended, that's the name of it also implies the Saratoga Center for the Family. So the family is always in the center of the discussion, because ultimately their insurance capacity or lack of will dictate how the services are paid for.
I really appreciate the answer, because I recall when we were discussing this, and I thought, this is really a great idea, but I was, I thought the 15,000, which I understood the last time, I thought, that's not going to buy much service. I know this is a pilot program. I understand more clearly now.
Yeah, that's the part of it. That's part of our partnership too, where there'll be some costs that because it's anytime we benefit our students, we benefit school. Anytime kids are more prepared for school, that's our business. Our business is to help educate kids, and if we can have them psychologically prepared for school, they'll be in a better situation to learn. So there's some direct financial costs, and I was also shared in the email, there's some indirect in-kind costs too, such as, we'll provide a space for them to be in so they can be here. The respective building principals will be a point of communication and contact, so we won't have separation. In other words, we don't want to have their staff in this little corner over there, and our staff who are dealing with kids in very similar capacity, not relating to them. So even having the communication between our psychologists on staff or our counselors who may see something about a kid or interacting with a kid and providing services with a kid, but we know that what we can do while we have them here may not be enough, and we need to extend that piece of it. So it just strengthens the network, to be quite frank with you. And so that's where some of the in-kind piece comes in, and we can, when I say we, certain staff can actually do their job more effectively because they also have some experts in some cases for things that we simply are not equipped to deal with. And we could tap into their expertise.
So my understanding then is we're using existing space, so there's no outlay there, direct outlay. We're not dedicating a person to staff this, although there may be some bleed over in the administrative side, but we're not using any of that 15,000 to pay someone.
No, it's yeah, exactly.
So the 15 that we've budgeted is available for furniture, telephone.
And it could be a wide variety of things. And that's why I said that this first year we're putting the model together and we'll see how it goes. And this model, different places provide services. Some places structure differently. Some places actually pay more to have more direct services provide to kids and families. And I'm not going to name a particular city or place, but quite frank with you, if we weren't a suburban school and we were in an urban setting where we know that many of the families are in a poor setting, not to say urban setting, in a poor setting, we may have to have a different model than we have here. And so that's why it's important when that people don't lump all these models in the same basket, because it does in fact vary based upon the capacity of the community, the needs of the student, and those kind of things. And so this first year we'll cycle through and see how things are. Is a referral process is working very well? Is not working very well? Do we need to add more to the pool, less to the pool? So those kind of things are the adjustments that we'll make. And so the 15,000 is the estimated budget that we have out there to what I call deal with a variety of miscellaneous costs that will provide some cost sharing with them as well. So, but it's not necessarily going to pay for the direct service of a particular kid or particular kids. It's more the miscellaneous operational costs, if you will. Does that make some sense?
Yes and no. Cost sharing.
Because they're paying their staff. That's what I mean. So we're not paying.
But we're not paying them.
Exactly.
So we're just providing space, furniture,
and some some of those miscellaneous things that we
cup of coffee, water,
whatever it might be. So when you think about the potential of connecting with potentially hundreds of kids for what we're potentially outlaying, it's certainly an investment that's worthwhile, because we see it now when we have kids who are in crisis and we reach out to families. The first thing they let them say, we don't know how to access services, we don't know what to do. And and sometimes we take for granted that people know what to do, but in many cases, if kids in crisis, unfortunately sometimes the families in crisis, and they don't have necessarily the guidance or the wherewithal to get the appropriate guidance. And so hopefully this model will help solidify, and I use the word link, will make those linkages that will be beneficial to the kid.
Yeah. No, I'm supportive of the partnership. I just want to understand.
Yeah. And as it unfolds, clearly we'll report back. I think we have a presentation back to the board, I think in the spring, to kind of talk about status of where we are and those kind of things. So we're planning to report back as well to the board and to the public.
I think the thing that impressed me the most was I appreciated the contract, but the amendment to the contract talked about the relationship between the providers and the families, and that was a really important connection to make, but also the providers and our staff to communicate what the services could potentially be, possibly go to faculty meetings and have that conversation so that really bringing, as you said, everybody on board together in support of the student. I'm looking forward to the presentation that's coming up, because I can't imagine that it wouldn't be beneficial to our students, so I'm glad to support it.
Yeah, I was thinking, Mary, this may be the best up to $15,000.
Yeah, I mean,
In
and
terms of the
having-
need out there, and we talked about this before, but the Center for the Family has an excellent reputation, so.
The family,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a unit,
Yeah,
yeah, it's great.
yeah. Good.
Good questions, thank you.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
Thanks, Ken.
Special education placements? Michelle?
Before I go on, did you have any other questions, or was the answer in terms of the interns? Okay, great. So I have the 2015-16 recommendations from the preschool committee and the school age committee.
Okay. Can we have a motion? Todd? Second. Jim? Any questions for Michelle? How's that tan working out for you?
Okay.
In midsummer?
Sorry.
All those in favor?
It's working hard.
They're working
We're
hard.
working hard.
Getting hard. Mrs. Bush, 19 pages. What are you doing to us?
Good evening. I would like to bring to the board's attention, we do have 3 upcoming retirements. Linda Pardis is a bus monitor, retiring after several years as of August 31st. Donna Rosano is the account clerk typist, currently in transportation, and she is retiring as of August 28th. And Seal Ryan had to retire earlier, and it's just on this agenda, and she has been a bus monitor, and she's been with us for 21 years.
Wow.
So those are the retirements at this time. You'll notice there are some appointments of teaching staff, and it's ongoing. The August 25th meeting will have several more additions. This has a lot of the summer work and coaching on it.
Okay. So can we have a motion to adopt the, and we have
Yeah, I don't know if you want to do that
Attachments.
separate.
No, we do.
Do it at
We
the
can do
same-
it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
We also do have the resolution for the SUSA contract. It is a 3-year contract from July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2018. That's our Shenandoah United Supervisors Association.
Do we have a motion to accept it? Mary? Second.
both.
Jim? And
This is for
For both.
both,
Correct.
this is for both, for the staffing recommendations and the resolution on the contract.
so second.
Yep. Okay. Any questions? All those in favor? Thank you for your hard work. I'm
Thank
sure.
you.
And your staff, I'm sure. We'll go back to public comments. Same rules as we had previously. If anyone from the public would like to speak again or speak now, they can. Seeing none, we'll call for adjournment. I do want to, again, just point out that there's a board meeting on August 25th, Tuesday, August 25th. It starts with a retreat from 3 to 6. That'll be here, and then a business meeting at 6 o'clock. And then our business meetings in September is September 15th, and a study session on the 29th. Do we need to say anything about opening of school this year?
Not
or
yet,
no?
not
Not
yet,
yet,
not
okay,
yet.
okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Mary, second, Jim. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
What if I wasn't in favor of that?
The bottom one, thanks, Becky.
That'd be a